he just went low. He's in his head. He's in his head. He's open. His head wide open. Cracked open in the face.
What's going on, guys? It's Mario Man 100 back again with another episode of How's My Team. We've got a little bit to talk about. Obviously, we've got the Giants up against the Bombers at home. We've also got the Titans played against the Roosters, obviously in Gosford. And we've also got Liverpool, the men's team, playing against another Big Six club in Chelsea. Even though Chelsea has not been playing great recently, obviously it's still a Big Six club. Whereas the women obviously playing in the FA Cup semi-finals against Brighton in their competition. So lots to talk about. Obviously we've got the Cubs to talk about as well. We've obviously got the A-League finals to talk about as well. Obviously finishing off with the women's semi-finals today, and obviously the start of the semi-finals, the first leg of the semi-finals anyway, for the men's competition. So lots to talk about. Hopefully this episode is not as long as a lot of the others have been, but without further ado, let's get started. Alright, we're going to start with the Titans, because obviously they played last night. It's actually Saturday, still Saturday morning, getting closer to Saturday afternoon, but obviously it was up against the Roosters. Big game obviously for the Titans, especially after last week, obviously not having the best result at all, and obviously going against the Roosters side and humming in the top four right now, and it was a 28-12 loss for the Titans against the Roosters. It ended up being 10-6 at halftime, and in fact, actually the Titans ended up actually scoring first in the game. Chris Randall scored early in the 16th minute with the conversion from Dayton Campbell. So it was pretty even for the majority of the game. Robert Toya scored about quarter of the way through the 30th minute. Conversion was missed. Then James Tedesco scored in the 36th minute, right on the buzzer of the 36th minute, with Sam Walker converting to make it the halftime score of 10-6. So they were relatively in it. Then obviously Robert Toya ended up scoring again late in the 47th minute. Daniel Tupou also scored very late in the 60th minute. Halfway through the 66th minute, Hugo Savala ended up scoring, and Tedesco scored halfway through the 75th minute with the conversion, and scored again shortly after that as well, I think. Yeah, it's a bit messy. Some of the notifications with like the badge notifications you get on the NRL app sometimes will pop a try twice for whatever reason. So the conversion, it should have been 28-6, but I don't think Tedesco scored a hat trick in the game. In fact, I'll bring it up again, but I'm pretty sure he didn't. Yeah, no, he only scored 2. I don't know why it does that. It does that a decent amount. It does that with conversions sometimes too. It pops up twice and stuff like that. And then Keanu Kinney scored about halfway through the 77th minute with the conversion to make it 28-12. In terms of the stats for the game, team stats in particular, possession was in the Roosters' favour, 53% to 47%, 86% completion rate for the Roosters, 78% for the Titans, so not ideal. It might be 8 percentage points, but it is a lot in the games in particular. A lot of things pretty even. Kick defusal, 60% for the Roosters, 54% to the Titans. Effective tackles, 89% to the Roosters, 87 to the Titans. So relatively okay in that stat. We did have obviously one intercept in the game as well, which is great. 21 ineffective tackles from the Titans to 16 for the Roosters. Line breaks, actually. I'll see if that is on there. 6-4 in the Titans' favour. So we're getting some of the stuff right, but the big issue, obviously, is the 12 errors to 7 in the Titans' favour in terms of errors. The Roosters did concede 6 penalties compared to the Titans 2, but obviously with 6 agains, it was 4 ruck infringement calls to the Titans, 2 to the Roosters, and 1 player piece on report. They played okay. I think that ultimately this Titans team are in the right direction, obviously with the fact that the Roosters didn't score until like halfway through that first half is a big plus, like well past the halfway point in the first half. I think is a testament, because a lot of the defense, especially last year's defense as well, would have had them scoring relatively early in that game. The fact that the Titans scored first is pretty impressive, though. In saying that, they need to score more points, they need to stop making errors too. They need to hold possession. There was apparently 2 tries in the game for the Roosters that actually were called tries, even though the bunker and the ref said that they were tries. The evidence suggests that it shouldn't have been. One of Robert Toya's tries, he does boggle the ball, and even Josh Hannay brings that up in the press conference as well after the game, that considering that it looked like that he boggled it and dropped the ball over the line before planting it on the ground. I don't know how that's called a try. And then there was a call that was a challenge, a captain's challenge from the Titans, that the ball actually, I'm guessing was off a kick, maybe it was a 40-20 or something, goes out on the full, hits the line on the full, and there is a picture of it, and it's not called out on the full. It's just a try. It's like a call that goes against the Titans, and it just feels like in a lot of ways the Titans are just getting shafted. I'll just see if I can find the picture of it, because I did see it. So that's the picture right there. Like, you can see that the ball, like, yes, some of it is on the grass, on the green grass, but you can see most of that ball, at least half of it anyway, is on the line. So that should actually be out, especially if that was kicked out on the full. That should be called on the full. I don't understand why. One thing I will say, the 2 debutants, in the fact that Zane Harrison did play relatively okay. Obviously, he didn't play his best game ever. I didn't expect that he probably would, considering obviously the opponent that we were going up against. It was always going to be a tough game for him to come in. But I think there is positives for that. I think that he was, especially considering I was at work, I wasn't listening to a lot of this game. There was a play after we scored, Keanu Kinienda scoring his try. There was a play after that actually Zane Harrison almost set up like another line break and another situation of scoring a try. So the ability is there, and I'm sure he did that a few times in the game as well. Tonamapia obviously playing on the wing as well, played relatively okay as well. So I think with more reps with both of those players, I think they'll slowly get into the mix for the Titans, and hopefully they have a bright future ahead of them. But with that result, right now in terms of a live ladder, we dropped to 15th because Parramatta ended up winning last night against the Cowboys, so that's fucking fantastic. So we dropped from 14th to 15th, so we drop even further in the bottom 4. Not ideal. Obviously the Storm are on the same for and against as the Titans right now. So if they do end up winning against the Tigers today, I believe that is today's game. I think that's the late game today, if not. No, it's the first game tomorrow on Sunday. then they will jump us as well. So we'll drop down to 16th if the Storm end up winning against the Tigers. The Dragons obviously still on the bottom, but they play Newcastle today. They play in the early game. So it'll be interesting to see how they go as well, because Newcastle obviously got most of their troops back, especially their main playmakers, and they've been playing relatively alright. So it'll be interesting to see where Newcastle ends up. But ultimately not a great result. I believe next round is Magic Round, I believe. Yes, it is. So we're playing at Suncorp. Technically a home game for us as well, but we play against the Knights on that game, the 2 o'clock game, so the early game of the Sunday docket for us. Ultimately it's going to be a huge week because we've got obviously the NRL Women's State of Origin series. Game 2 is playing on the Thursday this coming week. Obviously the Blues ended up winning in the first game. I don't think I actually mentioned that. But they won 11-6 on Thursday, the 30th of April. So pretty good game. Actually, it was pretty close together in terms of it. They scored 1 try each. They both kicked a field goal, and then obviously New South Wales kicked a field goal and then ended up scoring a try at the end of the game as well. So that was pretty impressive from them. But yeah, it's going to be a tough experience. Ultimately, I said that this month was always going to be tough. With obviously the Roosters being in the docket of that. Obviously, we kind of bottled it a little bit with the Raiders. Obviously, that was probably I wouldn't say the easiest game of the 4 games, but obviously in terms of ladder positioning, kind of was. But obviously the Knights game is obviously the next one out of the 4. But it's going to be interesting to see what we can do against the Knights. But we'll see what happens obviously today with the Knights and how they play. But it'll be interesting to see how the Titans back up, because obviously we're not driving too far away. It's only like maybe half an hour down the road, maybe an hour at most, from the Gold Coast to Brisbane. But again, it's been a while since I travelled from in Queensland in general, so it's my timing might be wrong on that. But obviously not as much travel, obviously, from the Titans to go to Suncorp as it is obviously for Newcastle. Newcastle obviously playing in Wollongong as well. They're playing today, so yeah, it's an interesting game, and it's going to be interesting to see them travel. Obviously, they're going technically down the highway, obviously, for a couple of hours from Newcastle to Wollongong, and then obviously coming back, and then obviously flying out. I'd say midweek, they'll probably be flying out for Magic Round. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how the Titans back up. Hopefully I think their defense will stay solid. I feel like we just need to score more points, because obviously holding the Roosters under 30 points, like obviously, yes, they've scored over 20, and it's another opponent this year that scored over 20 against us, but we've held quite a few teams under that 20 buffer already so far this season, and I think we maybe had 1 or 2 for about half the season last season. So we'll see what happens with that. It's always going to be an interesting situation with that, but Newcastle are going to be a good side. Hopefully the Titans can turn things around. But 28-12 against the Roosters, it's not the worst result, I will say. It's arguably it's probably about where they are at. I think maybe in terms of possession, in terms of the way that they played, they probably should have had more points. But ultimately as well with that, I feel that the Roosters kind of got a little bit extra on top, and obviously got some calls in their favour as well. It did seem like there was a little bit of bias as well, from what I heard and seen, which is not really a surprise anymore in terms of the NRL, because they just don't seem to take Titans very seriously, and I can understand why, obviously, with them being a little bit mediocre, but obviously, and then obviously getting overshadowed by the Perth Bears, obviously joining the competition next year, and then obviously the Chiefs in 2028. But it's going to be interesting to see what the Titans do, for the next 6 to 8 weeks, because it's going to be a big cluster of games coming at this point. Obviously Newcastle, then the Eagles, then obviously the bye, our second bye during around Origin time, and then obviously the third bye is towards the excuse me, towards the end of the Origin period. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with this team. But ultimately, if we can get some wins in that Origin window, I think we're going to be okay. Maybe not fighting necessarily for finals, which I'd hope that they do, but we obviously want to make a run for it. If we can make a run for it, that'd be great, but I'm not expecting it. But obviously, as a new coach, it is one of those things that we just kind of need to turn things around, and we need to turn them around very, very quickly, because things can unravel very, very quick if we're not careful, and we need to do better than that. Because this team has seen that so many goddamn times, and it's annoying. But yeah, it's probably where we're at the moment. Obviously, with the two teams, 28 to 12, 16 points the margin, seems about right. But yeah, as a Titans fan, it's a little bit annoying. Obviously, not scoring, a decent amount of points again for another game. So yeah. So Sunday morning, we're going to talk about the Giants. Obviously, they went back home to NG Stadium for the first time in quite a few weeks. Obviously, part of that is just due to the Royal Easter Show in Sydney. Obviously, they use the showground as part of the event as the venue. So, of course, obviously, NG Stadium in and around that area obviously is always busy. So, part of the games, obviously, around the Easter time, not usually played at NG Stadium for that reason. But obviously went up against Essendon, obviously lost the last couple of weeks, have been kind of on the downswing with a lot of things. Obviously was in relatively okay situation with the Gold Coast, obviously very inaccurate again in that game, obviously with a 20-point loss. It ended up being a win by 14 points over the Bombers. 103 to 89, 16 goals 7 to 13 goals 11. So accuracy much better. Thankfully, 23 shots on goal. 23 shots on goal and 16 obviously going through for a goal. So fantastic result there. Obviously, there's some rush behinds in that, but much more accurate. And what I will say is that the Giants were in front in the first quarter. They scored 4 straight goals in the first quarter compared to 3 goals 2 for Essendon. This game actually went up and down because by halftime, the Bombers were actually up by 15 points. So they actually were up at halftime by 15. They had scored 4 goals 3 in the second quarter compared to 1 goal 2 for the Giants. And it got as high as 30 points, I think, 30 or 31 points at some stage in the third quarter, or it got very close to 30 points in that. Obviously, there was 4 goals and 2 behinds for the Bombers, and 6 goals and 3 behinds for the Giants, giving them a slim lead of 2 points, the Bombers at three-quarter time, and then obviously turned things around with a 2-goal quarter for the Bombers, and a 5-goal 2-behind quarter for the Giants to finish the game ahead by 14 points. So fantastic, needed a win. Thankfully, at least the Giants did get that win. They really needed that because they've been under pressure a lot recently in a lot of recent weeks, and obviously win and a decent win will help our percentage a little bit, though I think that realistically we should have probably won this by a lot more, and hopefully we can next week, obviously in the West, but we'll get to that in a second. In terms of goal scorers, and I apologise for the sound in the background, obviously people are going to fucking do mowing the lawn and all that type of stuff and whippersnipping and all that, obviously on a fucking sunny day, because they have to do it in the morning on a Sunday because that's what they fucking do. So Toby Green scored 3 goals, 1. In fact, actually was their top scorer all game. Obviously, Jesse Hogan was out for this game with an injury. I don't know whether it's because he was just being rested. We might possibly see him next week in the game next week. But yeah, Toby Green, 3 goals, 1. Jake Stringer almost tied with him with 3 goals on his own. Brent Daniels scored 2. Phoenix Goddard scored another 2. So he's been fantastic since he's debuted, since the start of this season. He's got, I think most of the games he's had scored at least 1 goal, if not multiple, and has been very handy in the middle of the field. Max Kureski scored 2. Jake Riccardi scored 2 goals, 1. Aaron Cadman scored 1 goal, 2. And Harry Himmelberg scored a goal as well. Toby Bedford on there with the behind, as well as McMullen also with the behind. But yeah, a lot of points there from the Giants. Kicking disposal efficiency 75.7% for the Giants, 73.6% for the Bombers. Efficiency inside 50, 52.2% for the Giants, 39.3% for the Bombers. So not a great situation for them. More free kicks in the way of the Bombers. They were much better at marks. They had a lot more marks, even of marks inside 50. Contested marks more in the favour of the Bombers. More tackles as well in the game. But overall, great result for the Giants. And at this point, in terms of the ladder, they did move up a position. They did, they moved up 2 positions, I should say, with the win, and a little healthy boost in percentage. We're actually at 91.1% now, so that's actually really good. Hopefully we can get, we got well over 100 points, we got over 100 points again, and hopefully we can continue to do that in a lot of games, especially in games that obviously we're facing against, hopefully next week as well. Obviously in some of the other games, like say the return game, obviously in Melbourne against the Saints, and a few other games that we can score over 100 plus points in the game. It's going to help our percentage a great deal. But right now we've moved up 2 positions to 13th position right now. Obviously not all the games are done for the weekend, but we moved from 15th with a win to 13th, obviously with Port Adelaide going down very close again in their game against the Western Bulldogs. So the Bulldogs moved into the top 8 again. Geelong also won as well. They won against Collingwood in a big way. So Collingwood's percentage actually is 99.9, and they're in 9th position right now. So it's good. North Melbourne, they also lost again, but they lost by 2 points at the end of the game, or actually no, by 8 points rather, at the end of the game. Sorry, Western Bulldogs won by 2 points in the Port Adelaide game. There's quite a few games that have obviously come down to single points in this round, and there's been a lot of really good ones. Fremantle obviously going up against Hawthorn. They won, I think they won by double digits, but not by a lot. But Brisbane also won as well in their game. It was quite a good affair in terms of that, and all credit where credit is due to these teams doing well. The Suns also did win, obviously in the top end against St Kilda. Great result for the Giants. Obviously 13th position, behind by 5.5% behind Adelaide right now. So it could possibly jump to 12th if the Adelaide Crows lose heavily to the Richmond Tigers, but I doubt it. So 13th might be the best that we can do this weekend. But obviously next weekend, pretty important game on our docket, and obviously one that hopefully we can get some percentage points on, because obviously it's the West Coast Eagles that we play in the West. We play them late on Sunday, obviously, in terms of time zones. It's 6:15 p.m. my time, but obviously it's 2 to 3 hours behind in the west, so it's starting well in the afternoon. In that West Coast have still got to play today, so they could jump to 12 points if they win against Melbourne. But obviously Melbourne have been a great outfit, so hopefully they make it a good game for themselves, because ultimately their percentage has been really, really bad. They've been hit pretty heavily with a couple of really bad results. But they're playing okay. I think that they've obviously won 2 games, which is 2 more than a lot of people probably thought, and maybe 1 more than people thought, and a lot of people thought this season. And obviously sitting just on the edge of the bottom 4, but it's only because they've won that extra game compared to Carlton, Essendon, and Richmond underneath them, who have only won 1 game apiece. So ultimately, big game for the Giants in the West. Lots of travel, obviously, before we head back home, obviously against the Brisbane Lions. So that's going to be a huge, huge clash when we return home. Going to be a very big fixture. Hopefully we can get a big, big win in the West against West Coast. If we can get quite a few percentage points on that game, that'll be fantastic. If we can score well over 100 points again, that'll be great. Because our percentage really needs that. Yes, we're not quite that far away from, obviously 100% again, but at the same time, you've got to keep winning and winning by a decent margin and scoring points on the board. And obviously that leads to accuracy being a lot better. So we need to be a lot better in terms of, kicking accuracy in terms of scoring, because some weeks we've had have been very average, including last week, obviously in the first leg of the Expansion Cup. But hopefully we can get a big win against West Coast in the West before heading back home against the Brisbane Lions, and hopefully we can play well against them too. It'll depend on who goes over in the West. Maybe they might have Jesse Hogan sit out for another week, obviously due to the travel as well. They might not necessarily need him, and probably just rest him up for another week. It just depends on who we've got that needs a rest and obviously won't have to travel. We'll see what happens, but ultimately 14-point win for the Giants, back in the winners list against the Bombers. I know a lot of people will say it's against Essendon, but you gotta win games. You got to beat teams. Obviously the Bombers really took it to the Giants. The Giants not playing their best footy right now. Obviously been under pressure a little bit, especially over the last few weeks. But ultimately back in the winners list. That's all that matters. The 4 points and a decent bump to our percentage as well. So that also helps. Alright, now it's Sunday afternoon. It's clicked over past midday, quite a few minutes ago now. We was going to talk about the Liverpool men's team. Obviously, we'll talk about the women's team in a moment after this segment. Obviously, they haven't played yet. They'll play tonight at the time we're recording this. But obviously, Liverpool against another Big Six club in the Premier League in Chelsea. No matter what the position is, always going to be a tough game against some of the Big Six clubs. Obviously, that's Manchester United, City, Arsenal, Liverpool, Chelsea, and Tottenham. I was thinking, what's the six? But that's the six of them there. Everton kind of is on the fringe of that, obviously, because they've been in the competition for a long time, but obviously not up to the level of the other 6 clubs in front of them. But they're obviously on the outer, but not far away. But obviously big game despite obviously the positions. Obviously Liverpool being in 4th position, and then obviously Chelsea being down near the bottom of the top 10 going into this game. And it was a 1-1 draw at home at Anfield for Liverpool and Chelsea. In fact, actually it was 1-1 at half-time as well. Though, in saying that, Liverpool almost went behind in the second half. So Liverpool ended up scoring in the 6th minute with Ryan Gravenberch scoring in the 6th minute. Great goal as well. I actually did see the replay of that come up on my Facebook feed this morning. Fantastic goal for that. And then off a set piece in the 35th minute, Enzo Fernandez scored for Chelsea, making it 1-1 at half-time. Cole Palmer did have a goal that was disallowed in the second half in the 50th minute via VAR by offside. Someone involved in that, if not Cole Palmer himself, was involved in an offside call. So it was disallowed. And yeah, so it was almost 2-1 Chelsea's way over Liverpool at Anfield, but obviously VAR intervened, and not much happened after that. A few yellow cards obviously in the game, a lot to Chelsea. There's 4 compared to 2. 2 obviously for Liverpool. Joe Gomez and Alexis McAllister ended up picking up cards. And then 4 of the Chelsea players ended up picking up cards themselves, including Enzo Fernandez, obviously the goal scorer for Chelsea. So other notable results in the Premier League, obviously of last night. Obviously we'll talk about more about this tomorrow in a lot of the miscellaneous stuff. Obviously we won't talk about the full table because obviously not all the games will be played by the time this video gets uploaded. It will play literally the day of when this video goes up. They'll play the last game of the round, which I believe is Tottenham and Leeds, I believe is the last game. But obviously Arsenal will play tomorrow morning. There's a few other teams that are playing tomorrow. But obviously Spurs will be in an opportunity on Tuesday to stay out of the relegation zone, obviously against Leeds. But obviously other notable results, Brighton won 3-0 over Wolverhampton. Not great, obviously, from the Wolves. A 0-0 draw between Sunderland and Manchester United. So actually, great result for Sunderland, though they will say, obviously, it was a bit frustrating. But I think that a 1-0, like a 0-0 draw, despite obviously the result being 0-0, a draw with a team, obviously, that's in the top 4 in Man United. Obviously, they've confirmed their spot for Champions League football, and in saying that, I think they won't actually be able to get knocked out of third position now unless Aston Villa win tonight/tomorrow morning. So I don't think they can get knocked out being behind by quite a few points. Obviously, Chelsea, Liverpool still behind them by 6 points, obviously losing to Man United last week, and obviously Aston Villa 1 point behind Liverpool, so obviously 7 points. So in fact, actually in saying that, obviously goes down to the final day for Aston Villa to possibly jump into third position. But just one of those things. Bournemouth continue their unbeaten run with a 1-0 win over Fulham. So they're in 6th position right now, obviously playing for Europa League position at the present moment, but obviously with Aston Villa being in the Europa League final. It's a very interesting situation. If Aston Villa finish 5th, then Bournemouth actually will go into the Champions League next year, obviously with the position opening up for Champions League as well. So it'll be 6 positions open up, but that's only if Aston Villa finish 5th in the Premier League, which obviously they have an opportunity to do so. Obviously we'll talk about next week, which obviously is related to Liverpool, and then a 3-0 win for Manchester City over Brentford, which puts a little bit more pressure on Arsenal to win tomorrow morning over West Ham. And obviously West Ham are playing to get out of the relegation zone, obviously 1 point between them and Spurs right now. Obviously with goal difference being a massive hit for them right now, they'd prefer a win over Arsenal than not. But obviously it's 2 points between Manchester City and Arsenal, obviously with Arsenal dropping points to Everton and dropping 2 points to actually salvage a draw because they were behind in that game as well. But obviously the goal difference is now 1 goal between the two clubs at this point in time, and 2 points in competition points, which makes things very, very interesting in that regard. And hopefully Arsenal do end up dropping points. That would be hilarious for one, and 2 would be make the competition a hell of a lot more interesting with things going around, because obviously it'd be 5 points, and then obviously leading into the last 2 games of the season, it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. But ultimately, for Liverpool, the next game obviously is Aston Villa away from home. We will be playing at Villa Park, so obviously big clash in terms of Champions League qualification, because obviously we've slipped a couple of points. Obviously, Aston Villa still got to play, so we could still slip a position as well. Aston Villa, obviously, are playing Burnley, so you'd think that'd be a win in their regard, but obviously they had a big win, obviously, over Nottingham Forest in the Europa League semi-finals, so we'll see how they back up themselves after that game. Ultimately, I feel like that's possibly the way that Arsenal are going to have issues as well, obviously being in the Champions League semis and getting a win, obviously, in the two legs over Atletico Madrid, obviously it being a long game for them. Hopefully, you kind of were in a situation where you kind of wanted Atletico to kind of score another goal to get it into extra time, and I think West Ham were kind of hoping that it went into extra time as well, because obviously you play more minutes, obviously, with that team. You have to make a lot of changes with the team in particular. So hopefully, in that case, obviously, with it being a big clash, yes, obviously at home at Emirates for Arsenal, that the Champions League semi-finals has kind of played into their head a little bit. And they're very lucky that I guess that the Champions League final is after the Premier League season is finished, because obviously the last day is the 25th, but it will be at the end of that week. So if Arsenal do end up winning the league on the final, if it gets down to the final day and they win the league, they might not want to celebrate too much, because they could lose in the Champions League final. Obviously they play against PSG. PSG ended up getting the win in their semi-final against Bayern Munich, but both teams played relatively well in that. Obviously, but all four teams in the semi-finals played relatively well. Just one goal separating the difference between the two clubs in many positions. But Arsenal, I feel like, in a lot of ways, yes, they haven't lost in the Champions League, but that doesn't mean anything, because obviously Liverpool did that last year and lost to PSG in the round of 16. So, good teams are going to go up against good teams, and they're going to lose at some point. And ultimately, Arsenal at this point, yes, they're looking at the double, but might be looking at the double a little bit too much. But obviously, they've got a big game against West Ham tomorrow morning at the time of this recording. But obviously, we have a big game on the Saturday morning for us. So obviously, Friday over in England at Villa Park against Aston Villa. Huge 3 points up for grabs there, and 3 points that probably could confirm us at that point for Champions League football. I feel like with that being a 1 point margin in front of Aston Villa at the moment, obviously with the game in hand, but obviously 4 points at this point in front of Bournemouth, who's in sixth, and obviously 2 points behind them is Brighton in seventh. There's a possibility that we might not get knocked out if we do get a win in one of our last two games, whether it be Brentford or whether it be Aston Villa. But it is a very, very crucial clash, because we don't want to kind of drop three in a row. Despite Aston Villa being a really good team, we don't kind of want to drop three in a row, because obviously that puts pressure on that last game against Brentford on Monday the 25th, on the final day, to be like, we need to win. And that always screams a bad situation, because it's not always great when it comes to the final day and trying to win the game to try and confirm spots for European football, because obviously every team will be out for it. Brentford will be up for it, especially if they win their next game. Obviously losing to Manchester City this morning, but in saying that, they're still in a position right now in the standings. They're in 8th position, obviously, and 5 points behind Aston Villa. 7 points behind Aston Villa and 4 points behind Bournemouth right now. So they're right in the mix for obviously Europa League or Conference League qualification for them. It's just fighting for those spots right now, and that's the thing that's the most important for them. And obviously, if Aston Villa do end up winning the Europa League and obviously finish 5th, those positions will open up another position, because obviously 6 will go to Champions League qualification, which means that Europa League will be 7th, and then obviously 8th position, which they're in right now, becomes obviously the Conference League qualification spot. So any points that they can get, obviously to push a lot of the teams under them away from that spot, it's going to help them. So ultimately, they're going to be right up for the fight as well. But yes, obviously playing at Anfield, but it is an interesting situation that we just need to win as many games as possible. Hopefully, we can win the last 2 games of the season to confirm our spot, obviously in Champions League, and obviously to try and confirm a top 4 spot. Obviously, if we win against Aston Villa, that almost confirms it at that point in time. But obviously, winning the 2 games will do that. And obviously, Aston Villa dropping points possibly as well would help that. But obviously, if we win the next 2 games, obviously 6 points, we're 1 point in front of them. Obviously, they got to play a game yet, but if they got to win both games to kind of jump Liverpool anyway, in many regards, unless it goes to like a draw. But in saying that, obviously they're 1 point behind us at this point with a game in hand. So it's going to be interesting to see what the results will be heading into the final day of the Premier League. But obviously we've got a week before that. But 1-1 draw with Chelsea, and Liverpool dropping points again at home. It seems like a record that just keeps playing a lot this season for some reason, and I don't understand why. Alright, Monday morning, we've got to talk about the Liverpool women. Obviously there's a lot of things to talk about, but we'll talk about that tomorrow, because I've got a few things to do after recording this. We'll record tomorrow, and obviously we'll actually catch up with obviously the Premier League as well, because there's a few calls all throughout the weekend that have been crazy and have contributed to results in the Premier League that are a bit all over the place. But obviously we'll talk about that when we talk about that and the miscellaneous stuff. But let's talk about the Liverpool women. Obviously they were in the FA Cup semi-final at home at St Helens Stadium against Brighton. Obviously Brighton, a couple of positions up in obviously the women's equivalent of the Premier League competition in the women's comp. And Liverpool obviously sitting second last now, obviously with West Ham getting a win over Arsenal, which basically confirmed Manchester City as your winners of the WSL competition. So congrats to them, obviously. But was a big game, obviously, for Liverpool. Second last game of the season, obviously, unless they went through to the final. And in heartbreaking fashion, they did lose 3-2 to Brighton at home, and it was a defeat in stoppage time as well. So I was up for this game, lint-rolling some clothes as I usually do, obviously work clothes and all that type of stuff. So I actually could be able to listen to it via the Liverpool app, via the radio, basically, or like, I don't know whether it's Liverpool focused radio station, but they were playing that, so I was just listening to the game as it was going on. But yeah, 3-2 loss, though we were up 2-1 at half time. So that means that it was a 2-goal swing in the second half that downed us. But in fact, in actuality, it was 2-0 relatively early in the first half. In the 11th minute, Denise O'Sullivan, she scored in the 11th minute. Then we also doubled our advantage by scoring the 22nd minute. Then almost immediately after that, Brighton ended up scoring their first goal of the game, immediately off the kickoff and off a set piece, like as if that was a set piece. And that was pretty crazy. It's something that I've seen, obviously, in the game when I went down to see Sydney FC and Auckland FC, very consistently in that game, both times after Sydney FC scored in both of those games, and both of the goals to get ahead, 1-0 and then obviously 2-1 in that game. Very consistently were down on defence against the run of play, and obviously the first goal for Auckland didn't happen until like 10 minutes later. But the second goal was like probably only a couple of minutes, like maybe 2, 3, maybe 5 at most. So the defense was not good. It was almost immediate that it went from 2-0 to 2-1. It could have been 3-1 before half time. There was a big opportunity down the stretch towards the end of the first half. Obviously, it was a situation that went begging. So it went to 2-1 at half time. They scored off Madison Haley in the 54th minute to tie it up at 2. Again, more opportunities for Liverpool before that goal and after that goal, including a bit of stretch there with some substitutions. Obviously, Denise O'Sullivan went off with an injury, as well as Seri Holland as well. She also went off. And they had a big opportunity a couple of minutes before stoppage time through Kalek. She got into a break when Brighton actually turned on their possession game in the second half. They were much better in the second half than they were in the first. In fact, the reason why Liverpool were 2 up basically at very early in the first half was that Brighton were very much well out of control, and even then they could have possibly scored even before the 11th minute in the first half with the amount of pressure that Liverpool had at the start of the game. Obviously Brighton playing midweek as well, not helping them in their competition as well, but in saying that, they weren't switched on immediately and a lot of the pressure was on them. By halfway through the first half they seemed alright, especially after they scored their first goal. They kind of seemed to be a little bit more consistent. Obviously, Liverpool were a little bit better in terms of possession, in terms of attack in the first half, but Brighton turned it around in the second half very well, and were consistent pretty much almost the entirety of the second half. So obviously it was a break with Kalak, but she did miss an opportunity, was saved by the keeper, and then in the 5th minute stoppage time, sub that come on a few minutes before that, Nadine Nordam scored in the 5th minute stoppage time very late in the game to break the hearts of the Liverpool women's team, and ultimately it was coming off a clearance that was like a half clearance from the defence as well. It didn't break a lot of the line. That clearance was like, I wouldn't say it was half-hearted, but when I say half-hearted, you can kind of tell with the amount of, I wouldn't say enthusiasm, but the amount of pressure that was on that from the boot on the ball. You can kind of, instead of it being like a full-on clearance, like if you have played football before or have seen a game before, obviously with a big clearance, you usually see it get cleared, and it's a massive kick, gives you a lot of space, especially in defence. Even if it goes over towards the sideline, goes out for a throw in, a lot of the time you'll see that from a lot of defenders in particular. I get that she was trying to get it out of the box, but with the amount of power that she put in behind that clearance, wouldn't have cleared the outside the box. Was caught by an opposition Brighton player, and then obviously was the player that ended up scoring. They got on the end of it after a second and third touch, sent it from the right side into almost the top left corner, and that was right on, basically on the dot in terms of the whistle. They did blow the whistle obviously in the middle, but obviously when the ball went back in Liverpool's half to try and play it back around, the final whistle for the game was blown. So again, for the second year in a row, Liverpool get to the semi-finals of the FA Cup competition in the women's division, and lose in heartbreaking fashion in the semi-finals. Obviously, it was away from home last year, apparently, last season against Chelsea. This time, obviously, against Brighton. But obviously, the other game was playing as well at the same time. Actually, it was a couple of hours later, but by the time this game finished, the second one was actually just about to start, if not as it was going to start. Thought for a situation it was going to go to extra time, which wouldn't have been a bad situation for Liverpool. It just obviously the pressure would have had to be put on. But obviously, free kick getting given maybe a minute and a half before that goal in stoppage time was given. Not an ideal situation, gave Brighton a bit too much possession. And credit to Brighton, they obviously didn't turn it on in the first half, but they did in the second half, and they put the pressure on in terms of the game in the second half. So I give them credit where credit is due. Obviously, staring down the barrel immediately of 2-0, obviously getting a goal back almost immediately kind of helps that, but obviously scoring 3 goals in a row after being down 2 to win the game, in basically the last kick of the game, it's pretty well done. And then the pressure was up because both teams had opportunities to score, especially both teams in the second half, not necessarily in the first half. Liverpool had their chances in the first half, they didn't take them. In the other game, it did actually go to extra time. It was Chelsea versus Man City in that semi-final as well. Did go to 2-2, I believe, at full time in that game, and then Melbourne City do come from behind to win 3-2 in their game as well, but in extra time in that regard. And obviously Manchester City having a big week this week, obviously beating Liverpool and beating Liverpool very late in their game, obviously, which helped them obviously win the league. But in saying that, Liverpool obviously pushed them to the edge and pushed them pretty consistently, and I think that is a credit to this team in particular. I feel like with the Liverpool team, I will say a lot of the players have been playing relatively well. So obviously it will be Manchester City and Brighton in the final of the FA Cup. But we'll say a lot of the players from the Liverpool team played relatively well in this game in particular, and have played well in the last couple of weeks too. 52.2% possession to 47.8% in Liverpool's favour. Obviously shots on goal, 4 shots on target for Liverpool, 7 on target for Brighton, and 5 shots off target each for each team. So obviously a little bit less consistent, or actually probably just maybe around as consistent as Brighton in front of goal on target. Passing accuracy is pretty even. 79.8% to Liverpool, 76.2% to Brighton. Defense, 15 corners in total, obviously a lot of them going to Brighton. Discipline, 3 yellow cards obviously to Liverpool, and partially why some of the players actually did come off. But O'Sullivan and Seri Holland did get a yellow card each, and obviously big players obviously for the team, but obviously both went off for injuries. One of them sounding like it was a season-ending injury as well, to Seri Holland. Not sure on what the diagnosis is for that yet, but hopefully she is good. What I will say is that Falk in the goalkeeping role for Liverpool, fantastic effort. I know obviously it's 3 goals to the detriment of her goal, but there was a lot of opportunities and a lot of shots from Brighton that could have went in, that were stopped and were saved relatively well. 2 of the 3 goals at least, in terms of, if not all the goals, obviously from Brighton, very close to the goalkeeper. So when it comes to reaction, obviously it's a bit hard when they're almost right in your face and you're trying to react from a kick that, obviously you're going to react after the kick goes from the boot. So very consistent to keepers in the game, especially when it was 2-2 for quite a while in the game. There was a lot of shots coming from Brighton, and Brighton had a lot of pressure in that second half. As I said, played much better in the second half than they did in the first, and they kept the pressure on. But Falk in the goalkeeping role tried to keep us in the game, and I appreciate that from her. She tried her best to try to keep all the goals out, and obviously, she couldn't save. Beautiful strike, obviously, in stoppage time to win the game for Brighton. Obviously, for the Liverpool women, the last game of the season for them is against Arsenal on May the 16th. So this coming weekend will be their last game of the season, obviously in the WSL. And with that, obviously, in terms of their season, obviously, Man City are champions of the season for them. And Liverpool sitting in second last right now, but obviously have a chance to get into a good graces with going up the table again. Obviously, West Ham do have Manchester City in their last game of the season, and maybe Manchester City might rest a few players, obviously after, obviously the FA Cup semi-final, obviously being in extra time as well. But at this point in time, they could also drop points there because they are 2 points in front of Liverpool, who are sitting in 11th compared to 10th right now. So we'll see what happens with that. Liverpool, Leicester City, obviously in that position, 8 points behind Liverpool at the bottom of the table. So again, I'm not sure on how their promotion relegation situation happens in their league. I have no idea. But we'll say, obviously, London City actually were this team that were promoted at the end of last season and have done relatively well in their first season in the top league, because they're sitting in 7th right now. So they're actually sitting like right in the middle of the table, which is actually pretty good for a team that's promoted. That's pretty consistent. And then if you're thinking like in the men's league, at this point in time, that's exactly where Sunderland really is right now. They're in 12th, so they're right about in the same situation as obviously London City. But it's just one of those things. It's heartbreaking fashion again for the Liverpool women. Though obviously there were shots there for the game to be won, weren't taken, and obviously Brighton took their opportunities to score, and some of them they did take. More than the Liverpool women. So yeah, 3-2 and a loss in the semi-final in the FA Cup, and obviously the last game of the season for them is this weekend on Saturday. No, that's the wrong thing. I believe it was Saturday. Yes, Saturday at 10 p.m. my time. So with the men, it's 5 a.m. on Saturday morning. So, the men will come first, and then obviously the women's game will be after that. And we'll talk about that when we talk about that. But yes, 3-2 loss in the semi-finals. Again, a semi-final loss in the FA Cup for Liverpool 2 years running. And that's, in heartbreaking fashion both times. Never gets any easier. Alright, Tuesday morning. Don't usually record this, but on this day in particular, but we've done it the last couple of weeks. I've been obviously available to do so. We've got miscellaneous stuff to talk about, kind of want to hold off on miscellaneous stuff, and ultimately, of course, like I said earlier this week when I was talking about the Liverpool men, I obviously wasn't going to talk about the game on Tuesday with Tottenham and Leeds, but obviously that game played this morning, so I can talk about that now, and we'll get to that in a moment, because obviously there's some ramifications for that in terms of the relegation zone, and obviously games coming up. Obviously wanted to give you an update on tables as well. The Giants still staying in 13th position, ultimately behind North Melbourne, behind St Kilda on 16 points, going into obviously the game against West Coast, though it is Sir Doug Nicholls round, so I'm going to try and pronounce this. Willage. It's Wallitj in English, so that's the first word. Marawa. I know that's probably the pronunciation of the second word, but not sure about the pronunciation of the first word. Obviously, it did, basically Sir Doug Nicholls round, I should say, Indigenous round basically. So a lot of the teams will have different names in terms of the competition. So obviously Fremantle's the obvious one. Obviously we played them last year around this time. last year. Well Yallop, obviously they were Kawana, obviously, which is Adelaide. The Adelaide Crows is another one. There's a few. Obviously, Port Adelaide is one. St Kilda is one, and West Coast Eagles is also another one, and Melbourne, Nam, obviously, for them. So, yeah, so 13th position in terms of the Giants. In terms of the Titans, we did drop to 16th because the Storm did have a big win over the Tigers. Unfortunately, with the way that obviously we played, we had the same points difference at the end of the Titans game, so it was only if the Storm were going to win by anything that were going to get in front of us. So obviously that means that, yes, the Eels, obviously with the big Golden Point win against the Cowboys, and the Storm obviously winning against the Tigers, we dropped down to 16th again, obviously second last position, and obviously going to Newcastle, obviously face Newcastle at Magic Round at 2 p.m. on Sunday. So it's the first game on Sunday for Magic Round. Obviously there's a few really big games for that. Obviously the second game in Origin 2 for the women's competition. Obviously it's Women's State of Origin, so the Blues will be playing on the Thursday night. There's a few big games obviously next week in terms of Magic Round. Obviously one of the biggest ones, I think if not the biggest one, is obviously during that normal Sunday afternoon slot. That is Brisbane Broncos and the New Zealand Warriors. Fantastic game for that Sunday. Think that that's going to be very, very interesting to see. Hopefully with Broncos, I guess in the Broncos case, hopefully they can get some stars back. But ultimately the Warriors have had the bye. Obviously they had a week off, come back into Magic Round, come back refreshed a little bit. And hopefully, I guess in a way, the Warriors, if they can belt the Broncos at home, like at Suncorp, that'd be fantastic. I know that obviously a lot of people that support the Warriors will show up in that game for sure. But hopefully the Titans can get the win over Newcastle. Newcastle have obviously got a lot of players back. So it is a situation. It is what it is. But ultimately, just got to keep winning. And there's this point, can't go too much further down. Just due to the fact that obviously, we've got to lose 2 games to drop down to the bottom. But we just got to keep winning games. And obviously Newcastle, out of the block of 4, apart from obviously the game against the Raiders, was probably the one that I'd say I'd put an asterisk on and be like, that's a game that we could possibly win. Obviously it'd be the first game of the 2 times that we play them this year. Obviously we'll play them later on in the year at McDonald Jones Stadium, which is going to be a fantastic game there. The crowd is going to show up for that, especially if Newcastle are still rocking. Even when they're not really playing well, they'll still get a decent crowd there as well. It's one of the hubs that really loves their footy. But obviously, if Newcastle are playing really well, especially in the top 8, and getting closer to the top 4 at that point in the time of the season, that place will be rocking. Ultimately, they just want more construction for that top level. Obviously, with it having issues, because they'd be filling a lot of those seats out on top too. Now, we get to the Premier League, obviously, with the women. Their last game is obviously against Arsenal on Saturday night. I think it's Saturday night my time. Yes, 10 p.m. Saturday night. But obviously, with the Premier League, obviously got Aston Villa to play on Sunday morning for the men. But talking about Aston Villa, obviously they played yesterday. And they actually ended up with a draw. They ended up with a draw themselves. So they're on the same amount of points as Liverpool, obviously 4th and 5th on the same amount of points. But obviously with that, the goal difference is obviously the big difference there. It's +8 in our favour going into obviously the game when we face against Aston Villa. Obviously Aston Villa coming off Europa League qualification. Now they're into the final of the Europa League. So they're through after belting Nottingham Forest in the second leg of the semi-final. So they've got a few things to worry about in that front as well. So obviously at the top, in terms of the table, talking about obviously the table, obviously Spurs was this morning playing against Leeds. They actually led about halfway through the second half. And then obviously there was a penalty kick from the spot for Leeds, which tied it up at 1. Both teams just couldn't score, so it ended up being a 1-1 draw, which means that Spurs at the moment are outside the relegation zone and are outside the relegation zone by 2 points, compared to obviously what would have been 4 points. Would have been 4 points in front of West Ham. So it's not an unreasonable situation, but obviously it hurts a little bit less for the Hammers to lose to Arsenal. Unfortunately, I feel like there's quite a few calls that went against West Ham that went for Arsenal, and we won't get into that too much. Obviously, the goalkeeper, yes, got impeded, obviously by an arm across his neck, and obviously getting grabbed by another player behind him with a jersey. But it's funny because one of the players in that scuffle also was being held by a by an Arsenal player, Arsenal defender, in that play for that what was that equalising goal, and also Declan Rice actually tackling a player well before the goalkeeper even touched the ball. In that set piece, and obviously the goal scorer did as well. The goal scorer for Arsenal. So I don't know how VAR missed both of those, because those happened before. I watched the whole entire clip. I watched the whole clip of the free kick multiple times, and yes, it happens before the goalkeeper even gets the ball. So why, when it comes to VAR, is they're not checking for that? Now, ultimately, I sound a little bit salty, but I will say, obviously, the call on the goalkeeper was correct. The issue with VAR, and I know that obviously saying it as a Liverpool supporter, ultimately you're going to say, oh, you're crying about it now, obviously because the calls are going against you, whereas last season, obviously, considering Liverpool were champions, a lot of calls were going for Liverpool. Not going to deny that there was quite a few calls that even I thought were a little bit dubious when it comes to VAR last year. But since it's been introduced in the league, ultimately, of course, in obviously the season that Manchester City have done the opposite this week. Manchester City won, and obviously Liverpool won last year, and then obviously Arsenal a step closer to winning this season. It's very much VAR is very much an issue. I don't mind, obviously, them checking stuff, especially with, obviously, the situation with the West Ham, goal-scoring opportunity, right? What I don't get is why it took almost 5 minutes to look at stuff with VAR. I understand if they were checking everything included in that goal scoring opportunity. So whether it was they were looking at obviously Declan Rice on contact on the West Ham player, or the goal scorer for Arsenal also having contact on another player, or whether they were just looking at the goalkeeping foul or potential foul. The thing is, taking that amount of time, like ultimately even watching it at home, because obviously the angles that we have at home, when it comes to VAR, it's very much like the bunker in the NRL, where they have more cameras than we do in terms of the broadcast coverage. So I don't understand how, when we can watch it on broadcast coverage and see it in like 30 seconds, that yes, obviously the goalkeeper is impeded. It's like, well, why are we spending 5 minutes on a call? Yes, okay, maybe if it's just that call in particular, okay, that call was correct, but there's like 15, like 2 or 3 other opportunities around that. I don't know whether they were replaying it because it was just on timing in terms of the defenders getting impeded, like impeding the attacking players. I don't know what it was, but you shouldn't be looking at that goal keeping issue and foul for like 5 minutes. That's probably the issue with me in terms of VAR, is that they're taking way too long to look at it. Now, if they were looking at everything else, every possible little foul that possibly could have happened in the goal scoring opportunity, okay, fair enough. It's spending the time to make sure the call is right. But why are you spending 5 minutes or almost 5 minutes on a call like that? It doesn't make any sense, and it stops the momentum of not only, obviously West Ham, obviously, with one of the last kicks of the game, but obviously puts the momentum back in the sails of Arsenal, who just almost conceded a goal. Like, I don't understand that. And ultimately, again, like I said, I'm a Liverpool supporter, and I had calls of VAR go my team's way last season. And I'm not going to say that every call of those was right. And I'm pretty sure I even said that, possibly even last year. But the issue is the consistency, because ultimately there's been Arsenal attacking players that have impeded goalkeepers. Whether it was in the Chelsea game, whether it was the season opener against Manchester United, when, yes, Manchester United weren't playing well, but there's like 4 or 5 different instances that Arsenal this season have done exactly the same thing as the West Ham players have done, and have not been called and had the goal overturned to a no-goal and had the goal scored as is, and they go against that for this call. And ultimately there was a call today in terms of the Tottenham game of a swinging arm and an elbow from, I believe it was Richardson, in the air competing and hitting the defender of Leeds United in the head, so much so that it made a red mark on his head, and VAR did not intervene with that and say, oh yeah, no, that's a free kick against Tottenham, and it's for Leeds United. Now, I understand if the ball has to go out for VAR to check it or something like that. If it's something like that, for example, okay, fair enough. We see with the NRL with captain's challenges, sometimes if you have a play that if you go on to the next play from that, you can't really challenge on the play before, since the current play is obviously a different play altogether. You can only call on what the current play is for that. If there's a delay with that and the ball has to be out for it to be checked, okay, that's fair enough. But in saying that, it's just inconsistent, and that's the thing for me, is that there's inconsistencies with technology, and I understand that. And there's going to be instances where there's inconsistencies, but if it was like, say, obviously it's a 38-week season, right, in terms of the Premier League. Only we got 38 games for all the teams in the competition. So there's 20 teams. Extrapolate that. That's what, 600, 700 games. 700, maybe 760 games, something like that. If they're all playing the same amount of games. Why are we in it? If it was an instance where the inconsistency was maybe like, once every 5 to 6 weeks, right? In terms of the competition, it would be mostly consistent, and yes, those calls could be big calls as well, but at least it'd be consistent on most things. Like, oh yeah, that's offside. That amount of space offside is offside. Player having contact on a goalkeeper, that will overturn a goal no matter what it is. The attacking player that's hitting, that's competing and impeding on the goalkeeper, fair enough. That's a call. That's a foul. Make that a consistent rule and apply it to every single team, not just to some teams and then not do it to others. It just doesn't make sense to me. And it seems like it's a little bit, I wouldn't say corruption, but, and I know I'm ranting about this, but ultimately, again, I've seen a little bit with Liverpool last year, so I've got a little bit of bias. I'm not gonna doubt that, but I will say, yes, even last season there were some calls for Liverpool that I was like, I don't know whether we should have got that one, or it's like, well, we got lucky with that one because we shouldn't probably have gotten that. There were some calls that obviously were correct, or some that were in that grey area. But there's some calls that I will say were wrong. And even in, obviously, the season beforehand, obviously with Manchester City winning, there was calls in the VAR for that too, in terms of offsides as well. So we just need to make sure that the rules are consistent throughout the entire season and make sure they're all applied to all teams, not just obviously the teams getting relegated and teams outside of the top six, like the big six clubs, and the big six clubs get a different rule compared to everybody else, because that's what it seems like for some clubs. And I understand why some people would be upset with the competition. And I apologise for the rant. I was going to send this video way over time, but I've still got a little bit of time to work. So Arsenal still on top with 79 points from 36 games played and 42 plus in their goal difference, plus 42. But in saying that, they have 68 goals for, 26 goals against. Man City are in second with a game in hand. Obviously, they play on Wednesday, so it'll be Thursday my time. They play against Crystal Palace, so then play that make-up game for match round 31, match week 31. They play that midweek before obviously playing next week late on against Bournemouth on the Tuesday, because I think they obviously have Chelsea in the middle there for the FA Cup final as well. So they've got a few things to worry about in terms of that. But Man City in second, 5 points behind on 74, obviously with that game in hand against Crystal Palace. But they also have 72 goals for and 32 goals against with a plus 40 goal difference. So if it goes down to same amount of points, same amount of goal difference, it'll be goals for, and right now Man City have scored more goals. So that is a situation where they would win the league for that. If that even gets tied up, obviously it'll be on count back on terms of points between the two teams, which obviously Man City have 4 points over Arsenal's 1, because obviously they won in the second fixture against Arsenal compared to the draw in the first. So they will have the points, the points advantage in terms of that. So if it goes back to count back in terms of points, all the same, goal difference is the same, and the amount of goals both teams had scored is the same, it'll go down to that. So it'll be crazy if it gets down to that result, but ultimately we'll see, because obviously Arsenal, their next game is against Burnley, and Burnley showed up. Burnley showed up against Aston Villa. If they play a similar game to how they played against Aston Villa, and maybe a little bit in terms of mixing that with how West Ham played against Arsenal, Arsenal might be in trouble. Ultimately they're going to win. They're going to win both of their games. Ultimately, Man City, if they lose a game, obviously the title race is over. But if Arsenal lose a game in the next two, whether it be either against Burnley or against, I believe they play, trying to think now, they play someone else down near the bottom, I think it's Crystal Palace. If they lose against either of those teams, especially if they lose to Burnley, which obviously is a possibility, but I don't think it's a very high rated possibility. Then obviously it will go down to the final day and being like, okay, Arsenal have got to win. And ultimately, if they do win, and they do win the league, they've got the Champions League final a couple of days after that. I think it's 5 days after. So they can't celebrate too hard. They have to train for that as well, and focus on that going to, I believe, Istanbul or Budapest or something like that, to play against PSG, and PSG will be right up for it as well. Man City in second. Third position is Man United with 65. 6 points behind them is obviously Liverpool in fourth position with 59. Then Aston Villa also on 59 in fifth position, with obviously the Europa League final coming up. So if they do win that, then if they stay in fifth position, sixth position will be open for a Champions League spot as well. So right now in sixth position is Bournemouth with 55. Bournemouth's next big game is against Manchester City. So ultimately, Manchester have a lot going against them right now. Obviously, they got the Crystal Palace game, then obviously got to play against Chelsea, and then midweek they got to play against Bournemouth before obviously playing the last game of the season. It's going to be very tough for them. But I feel like that Man City can win that game. Obviously, there's a huge couple of big games obviously before that, but including obviously an FA Cup final. But it depends on what Chelsea bring up as well, because who knows with that. Seventh position, 53 points is Brighton, with Brentford falling down to 8th position with 51. Ninth position is Chelsea with 49, tied for 49 points is Everton in 10th. So that's your top 10. Fulham in 11th with 48, also followed by Sunderland in 12th, also on 48 points. Newcastle in 13th position with 46. Then obviously with the draw, Leeds actually jumps 2 positions to 14th position with 44 points. Obviously with their goal difference being a lot better than Crystal Palace right now, and obviously Nottingham Forest in terms of points as well. So Crystal Palace is next in 15th position, obviously with a game in hand, obviously against Manchester City on 44. Then Nottingham Forest in 16th position with 43. Now both Leeds and Nottingham Forest, obviously with the loss to West Ham, are safe. They're safe from relegation right now. So it is technically a 3-horse race with Crystal Palace, I feel like, but ultimately, I think even Crystal Palace is out right now because they're obviously on the same amount of points as Leeds, so they're safe. So it's only Tottenham obviously in 17th position with 38 points, and West Ham in 18th position in the relegation zone with 36. So it's only between those two teams on which one will be relegated. So two teams that have been in the competition for a long time. Obviously Tottenham have been there forever. West Ham obviously have dropped out at least once or twice in the last 20, 30 years, like 20, 25 years. But ultimately they're in the relegation zone right now because obviously Burnley and Wolves are relegated right now. Obviously Burnley in 19th and Wolves in 20th position. Obviously Burnley with 21 points and Wolves with 18. So they're in front by 3 off the bottom. So here's hoping. We'll see what happens with that. Obviously, big game obviously for Liverpool with Aston Villa. Then we go to the A-League finals. Huge couple of games, obviously the women's and the men's. We'll get to obviously the men's in a moment. But ultimately, with that, it is one of those things. The finals have actually really, really been great in terms of the A-League women. 2 great finals in that. It's opening a link to Tic-Tac for whatever reason, because I clicked the wrong link, I think. But ultimately with the women, it was a 1-0 win for Melbourne City over Victory, so that means that they won 2-0 on aggregate to get into the final. Obviously they were playing at home, and Wellington Phoenix ended up winning 2-0 in their game. They actually went to obviously extra time because they did score in the 42nd minute in their game, which obviously they were behind by 1 goal. It was 3-all in terms of 2-all rather. In terms of aggregate score, so obviously went to extra time in the 102nd minute. Woods scored her second goal of the game, and the game ended up 2-0, obviously in Wellington's favour. So that means Wellington go to their first grand final in the women's competition, and that plays on Saturday the 16th, and play at Amy Park. So obviously since Melbourne City finished top, and their position's obviously higher than Wellington Phoenix, they play obviously hosts Melbourne City. But I feel like the Phoenix could win against Melbourne City. They've played relatively well. Melbourne City's defense obviously all year round has been relatively good. in terms of the competition, in terms of the women. They only conceded 20 goals all season, and Wellington actually conceded only 17. So the defense in terms of conceding during the season, Wellington were a lot better than Melbourne City was. But obviously big game for both clubs, especially if obviously Wellington do win. Obviously counting the men's, that would be a situation where they win their first championship of the A-League, whether it's men's or women's. So that'd be great for them. Then we go into the semi-finals, obviously the first league, the semi-finals for the men, and obviously New Zealand. It was Auckland FC 1, Adelaide United 1. So it ended up finishing 1-1. About halfway through the second half was when Adelaide scored. So ultimately, huge game there at Cooper Stadium on Friday. And it ended up being also a 1-1 draw in the second game against Sydney FC and Newcastle Jets. And actually both goals were scored in the second half and about 8-9 minutes between each other. So actually Newcastle actually scored after Sydney FC. And the pressure was on pretty much all game. I watched most of this game and Jets got really close. But obviously Sydney did have a few good shots on. So obviously they'll play at McDonald Jones on Saturday. So a huge game for both clubs in terms of their competitions. It is going to be a huge clash, doubleheader in terms of the second leg of the semi-finals. Obviously playing at home with the hosts of the top two positions of the competition. Fantastic situation for both clubs, and hopefully with that, would like to see obviously Sydney FC get knocked out. I wouldn't mind seeing obviously Auckland get in, Adelaide United get in. Obviously would love to see Jets get in, and Jets would have to win obviously against Sydney FC. Now I know I've rambled a lot. I rambled a lot about VAR. So lastly, we'll be getting to the Cubs. Obviously we'll talk about the week that we had in terms of the week. Obviously last week we had a sweep at home against Arizona. We had a sweep obviously with Cincinnati. Obviously did talk about it a little bit. It was obviously going to be a tough series against the Reds, including back-to-back walk-offs. Not even kidding. In terms of the first game, it was 5-4. I gotta see what the score was. Chicago ended up hitting 2 runs in the 9th to walk it off, including Conforto actually hitting his first home run of the season. So they walked it off in the 9th inning. And then obviously went to extra innings in the second game after tying it up late in the 8th. And then Michael Bush ended up having a pop out, sacrifice fly for a walk-off in the bottom of the 10th. So that was fantastic in terms of that. And then ultimately the third game was 7-6, and we scored. It was bad because we got into a situation where we're actually in front by 4 runs. It was 6-2, leading into the top of the 9th inning. And our relievers ended up having full bases, and we conceded a couple of runs. Obviously, Thornton come in first game since I think late or mid-July last season. Come in to rectify or come in the 10th inning, obviously to fix that up. But obviously, Chicago were behind 6-. They were actually all tied up. Actually, no, they were behind. Sorry, they were in front 4-2. Then Cincinnati scored 4, so they went 6-4. And then we actually scored 2 off PCA actually hitting a home run with one person on base to make it 6-all in the bottom of the 9th. Couldn't get the score in the 9th, and actually PCA actually scored that while there was 2 outs as well. So that was even more clutch in terms of that. Obviously, Ben Brown actually did come in that in the top of the ninth inning to fix up the issues that we had with our relievers. And then yes, we scored. Actually scored from four balls and a walk, an actual walk off in the 10th to Michael Bush. So it was unfortunate, obviously, for Cincinnati, and then it was an 8-3 win in the last game. Cincinnati did get one in the 8th, one in the 6th, one in the 8th, and one in the 9th. The Chicago Cubs did end up having a situation where they scored 7 runs in the bottom of the 4th inning. So with that, we ended up having with that, and obviously going into Texas, going into Arlington. I keep flopping my words today. I don't know. I'm a bit excited to talk about this. We're going up against a series against the Rangers. I was going to say the Ravens, but that's fucking NFL. That's not even close. And the Raiders. I was saying the Raiders as well. Obviously against the Rangers, and we won that first game 7-1 as well. So we actually ended up getting a 10-win streak again for the second time this season, and the first time in like 12 games. So I think the record is like a team in the 1930s from the Cubs. I think it was 1932 Cubs who did that 4 times in a season. So fantastic result, obviously, for that. And then we did lose the next 2 games, 6-0 and 3-0. So we did lose the series in Arlington against the Rangers, which is a bit. We just couldn't hit. We couldn't get people on base. We got 3 hits in the second game, and we got 4 hits in the first of the losses. So we have obviously the bye day today. Have 3 games obviously against Atlanta, in Atlanta, and then have 3 games away. So we have obviously the Braves, who obviously are playing relatively well, and around about the same record as us. Then we have obviously the Battle of Chicago with the White Sox, 3 games against the White Sox, obviously at Wright Field, and then obviously 3 games at home before our next bye day on the 22nd against Milwaukee. So it is a divisional matchup series at Wrigley Field against the Brewers, obviously. So obviously a big series incoming that. In terms of the standings, Chicago still on top in the National League. They're in front by 3.5 games to Milwaukee at this point. Milwaukee did actually jump a few teams, with obviously the Reds kind of faltering against, obviously getting swept against the Cubs. They dropped to the bottom. The Pittsburgh Pirates, obviously in front of them. St. Louis Cardinals, the same games away from the Chicago Cubs. It's just they have 1 more loss, but also have 1 more win than Milwaukee. Obviously, Milwaukee might still be playing. I'm not sure. In terms of our record in terms of the wild card, we're in 2nd position right now. We were in 1st before obviously the 2 losses to the Rangers, where Atlanta actually also lost a couple of games as well. So we're only behind them by 1 game, I think, but obviously leading into the series that obviously we play them. And now in 3rd position in terms of leading in their division is actually the Padres as well. They actually got in front of the Dodgers. The Dodgers 1 game behind the Padres because they actually have lost twice in the last couple of games. Obviously, the wild card in terms of that, if it was finished today, would be Milwaukee in 5th and St. Louis Cardinals in 6th. Then obviously in terms of the American League, the Tampa Bay Rays actually jump the New York Yankees. They have played 3 less games though, but the Yankees are actually behind by 6 games in terms of the wild card by Tampa Bay. So I'm guessing those 3 losses actually made up for 2 games And obviously the Yankees are actually in a 4-game losing streak because obviously they lost in a sweep to the Brewers. So that kind of sucks for us in terms of our division, but kind of is funny, obviously, with the Yankees being like, oh, we're the best team in baseball, and you don't have the best record right now. Obviously, the best record right now is obviously Atlanta, but Tampa Bay is pretty close. They've played 2 less games, but obviously behind by 2 wins compared to Atlanta. Obviously, have got 1 less loss compared to the Cubs, but have played 1 less, but got 1 less win than Chicago as well. So, yeah. And then in terms of the other automatic position, that's the Athletics still with 21-19 on the season. Then it's Cleveland Guardians still in 3rd position, Yankees in 4th, Texas Rangers move into 5th in terms of the wildcard spots, and obviously the White Sox will be in 6th position, just in front of the Seattle Mariners again. It's funny. Just look at them. I'm like, where the fuck is the Astros? I knew the Astros were up there. And the Astros are now 2nd last in the American League, which is pretty funny. Obviously, the Mets are still last, and the Angels for the American League is last in their conference as well. So yeah, big games obviously against Atlanta in Atlanta. Obviously, big game, big couple of games against the White Sox, obviously who actually swept us all spring training. And then obviously 3 games at home against Milwaukee, which is going to be a huge series for us. But Cubs are doing relatively okay. In terms of obviously other results, we just need other results to kind of go our way a little bit. But, it is one of those things. But hopefully things will work out. Obviously we've got big games, obviously for the Giants, obviously going to the West. We've got the Titans, obviously at Magic Round against Newcastle. We've got Liverpool, the women's team playing their last game of the season against Arsenal. We've obviously got big top 4 clash. I guess it's top 5 clash, obviously against Aston Villa, but will be the game that almost confirms one of the teams in the top 4. Unless it gets to a draw, then obviously we'll go down to the last game of the season. Oh, actually, that's the other game. I remember now. Manchester City has still got to play Aston Villa in the last day of the season, so that's going to be crazy in terms of that. But obviously, around that time, Aston Villa will have the Europa League final around that time, so they might be focused on that as well. So we'll see what happens, but there's a lot of things going on in terms of that, and obviously a big series coming up, big 3 lots of series in the next week and a half for the Cubs as well. So apologise for ranting, apologise for this segment going massively long. It probably makes this episode just as long as some of the rest of them in the last few weeks, but I apologise. But that I like talking and obviously talking about ramifications in terms of the relegation zone in the EPL, and obviously the promotion situation, like obviously the champions. Oh, speaking on promotion, almost forgot. Obviously the championship, obviously the second tier in terms of the teams getting promoted into the Premier League. Forgot, obviously, because that played not last week, the week before, obviously was the end of the season. Wrexham did miss. They did end up finishing 7th on behind by 2 points against Hull City, which kind of sucks. So it was Coventry, obviously, being champions. Then it went down the last day, obviously, for Ipswich Town and Millwall, obviously, to get that confirmed spot straight away in terms of promotion. And it was Ipswich Town that got the win. So they moved into 2nd position, so they're automatically promoted. They're back in the Premier League after obviously being up last season and then dropping down in the Championship again. And then obviously it was Millwall in 3rd, Southampton in 4th, Middlesbrough in 5th, and obviously Hull City with the win that they got was in 6th position. And at this point in time, in terms of time of recording, I think the second game of those games is playing tonight in terms of the Championship playoff. But Hull won this morning against Millwall. So Millwall did stumble. They were tied up. Actually, for both games, I believe, were tied up in the Championship first legs of the playoff semi-finals, but Hull did win 2-0 in terms of the game today and on aggregate. So they're through to the playoff final at Wembley. So they will play either Southampton or Middlesbrough for that final spot in promotion. So interesting. We'll see what happens with that. Obviously, that will be expanding. I believe it's expanding to 7th and 8th next year. So ultimately, if that was the case this season, Wrexham would have gone in to a playoff spot as well as Derby County. So it would have been interesting to see what would have happened there. But obviously, we'll see that next season. I'm not sure how that will work out. I'm guessing 3 and 4 will kind of have the week off. Because obviously the 1 and 2 will automatically be promoted, so they'll be out of the playoff situation. And I'm guessing 3 and 4, the incentive of finishing third or fourth in terms of that, will be having the week off, and then obviously the second leg of the semi-finals in terms of the playoffs would be at home for those two teams, for the team in third and team in fourth. I'm assuming that's how that's going to work. Obviously, they haven't actually said it yet, but I'm pretty sure if it's like 6 teams, obviously in that playoff picture for that playoff final for that last position in terms of promotion to the Premier League, I think that's how that's probably going to go. But we'll see what happens with that. But yeah, so obviously Coventry City will be in the Premier League next season. First time in a long time that they have been in there. And obviously Ipswich Town will move back up again as well. Obviously Burnley and Wolverhampton Wolves will move down. But obviously we don't know yet if it'll be Hull, Southampton or Middlesbrough that will play and get into promotion. And we won't know whether it will be Tottenham or West Ham that will drop down in relegation until almost the last day of the season. It could be later next week, but we'll see what happens with that. But lots of things to talk about. Completely forgot about talking about that last week, so I apologise on that and being late, but obviously got some results today in terms of that. And obviously there's a lot of playoffs going on in terms of League 1 and League 2 as well, in terms of teams going up and down and all over the place. So lots going on in terms of the Premier League, in terms of English football. Lots and lots going on, so it'll be crazy time. But we've all said thank you guys so much for watching this action-packed and long episode of How's My Team. This has been Mario Man 100. You guys are great all night, and of course, take care.